Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into the Test Drive Unlimited franchise, in particular to the second game, TDU2, to one of the cars which is, I would say, a little bit misplaced as far as the lineup goes. And I hate to say that, because even in the real world, regardless of games, this is one of my absolute favourite cars, the Ascari A10. One of the best hardcore track-going supercars ever built. Didn't actually reach production, which a lot of people don't realise, but that really is a shame. And it's an absolute monster. Of course, around the Top Gear track, it was even quicker than stuff like the Gumper Apollo. And in the Forza franchise, you can turn your KZ1R edition into a pretty convincing A10 replica and take on cars like the Gumper or the Maciel and various others too. Now in the Test Drive Unlimited franchise, there's a significant difference to having the car, or any car like this in fact, in the game. Because we also of course have the Gumper Apollo, which would seem to be a pretty good rivalry. But that's where the problem comes, because a car like this, although you may not think it, actually really has no place. And I am saying that as someone who absolutely adores this car. I love the A10. It's an amazing car, a fantastic performance machine. It's got that 5-litre V8 BMW engine, 625 horsepower, over 400 pound-feet of torque. It weighs less than a lot of GT3 cars at 1280 kilos, horsepower per tonne is nearly 500, and the performance is great. 2.6 seconds to 60, a top speed of about 210, 220 depending on downforce. It's a monster, it really is, and more often than not, it's faster than many of its rivals with even more power. The Gumper, for instance, is a slower car than this, despite being even more powerful and not that much heavier. So why then am I saying that it doesn't really, not deserve, but it doesn't really feel well placed in the franchise? Well, put simply, because the type of performance which this car has simply doesn't lend itself to Test Drive Unlimited, because this is by definition a track-going or track-biased supercar, just like the Gumper Apollo. But even the Gumper Apollo is more suited to this game than the Ascari is, and the reason why is because of top-end speed. And this is something which not only the car itself has as an inherent issue, but is also compounded, unfortunately, by the game itself. Because although many people don't realise this, the Ascari A10 suffers from a strange glitch, which appears to be a permanent one where it doesn't matter how much you tune it up, the top speed never goes above 210. That's weird, but it never changes. Regardless of how much power it has, how little power it has, that always remains constant. So all that you can improve is the acceleration, and the performance does change according to the specs, it just doesn't change in reality. It's a very strange thing to happen. But beyond that, because that in itself is enough to cripple any car, but beyond that, it's not a top-end car anyway. And the problem with that in this game is that Test Drive Unlimited has always been a very, very high-speed racing game. That's why cars like Veyron's, Saleen S7 twin-turbos, Koenigsegg's do so well, because they have that sheer top-end, basically straight-line speed with some handling in there as well. So a vehicle like this, or a Zonda Cinque, or a Gumper Apollo, or various others, are always going to struggle, because you could say, well, surely then that would apply to something like a Caterham as well, or even a Noble, but you'd expect me to extol the virtues of those cars, which I would, because there is a crucial difference. They are not A1 category cars, as this one is. And that's where the problem lies, because what this should be is the pinnacle of A2. Because if that were the case, it would be perhaps OP, but still far better off than where it is. Because the simple fact is, you cannot beat really any of the other A1 category cars in a straight line with this vehicle. There might be one or two obscure ones, but none of the big dogs are even worried about this thing. The handling is incredible, the acceleration is fantastic, but it's simply not good enough for top-end speed to be able to keep up with any of those top-tier hypercars or even some other supercars, especially tuned ones, because the vast majority of races on both of the maps involve very high-speed sections, and some of them are almost entirely won by sheer top speed. That's a crippling disadvantage anyway, but when you add on top of that the fact that the tuning cripples it even more, and it just feels like a victim of its own performance. Now in the real world, it's awesome, And if this car was on Forza or Gran Turismo, it would be great, because that's the type of game where it needs to be. Track racing games, not street racing games. Now, with all that being said, I don't dislike the fact that the car is in the game, it just shouldn't be here. Something like the B-Engineering Adonis, which is another one of my favourites, which was a DLC car from the first game, is much better suited because, just like the Ascari, it's rare and more obscure, but it has a very high top speed. So what about when you actually drive the car? Because for 585 grand, you want to hope at least that you're going to get some kind of enjoyment out of it. It's not just going to be useless. Well, you can get some. There are, of course, a lot more racetracks integrated into the maps on the second game than there were in the first. I mean, we have 2 maps for a start, so of course there's going to be. But those situations and those types of circuits, also city-based circuits as well, with lots of hairpins and 90-degree turns, that's where this car can really come in handy. Now, of course, you can still spin up the tyres because it's got a lot of power, a lot of torque, and it's not overly heavy. But still, it's a very good car for technical circuits, cornering, grip, and low-end acceleration in particular. The unfortunate fact is, there just aren't enough tracks to use it on for what it's good at. It feels misplaced, for sure. And it's one of the only cars actually in the game that I think feels that way, because most of them do deserve a place to be here, and they feel well matched. This one is crippled by tuning, it's not intended for this purpose, and it's way too high a class. It's an understandable class. It deserves to be if it were on a racetrack, but anywhere else, it just doesn't. It would be like if the Caterham was an A1 category vehicle. That just wouldn't make sense, because it's simply not that kind of car. Even though some of its specs, such as the acceleration for instance, in a similar way to this one, might indicate that it should be, but it shouldn't. So that's a shame. It's a car which, just like some others, I would say the Gumper as well to some degree, if the Caparo T1 were in the game, it would definitely fall into the same disadvantage. It's a shame. It just means that although the car is fun, it's fast, it's hardcore, it's brutal, and it's a great collector's piece because there aren't that many games that feature it, and I own one, of course I'm driving it here, just don't get your expectations too high. Because those of us who do love the Ascari A10 tend to really, really love the Ascari A10. So from that perspective, you will be disappointed by how little use you can actually get out of the car for racing. So if you go into it with that mindset, then you will be able to look past the disadvantages and have a lot of fun just driving the car and maybe using it for the occasional race. But beyond that, don't expect too much of it. Overall then, that's it for this particular pick. I wish it could be more of a glowing review. You guys know how much I love this car. I talk about it quite a bit on the channel. But unfortunately, that's the way it is. But that's it for this pick. Of course, I'll see you guys next time. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.